Hey everyone, Philosopher Stoner 666 here. Just checking out this moon here. It's pretty sweet looking. So anyways, yeah, Tony Soprano, or the actor James Gandolfini, died at the age of 51. And this got me thinking back actually to that show and to a book I read a few years ago called Pop Culture and Philosophy. So I forget the names of the authors specifically, but they sort of delve into pop culture and trends in current culture, movies, films, TV shows, and analyze them for any sort of ideas that are in them. So looking back at The Sopranos, it's actually very interesting that it's a gateway to pessimism, at least in the first 3 seasons. So, I was actually thinking back to a few little scenes that I can remember actually that stuck with me, because I grew up watching the show when I was a teenager, grew up on this sort of stuff. And at the time when I was watching the show, I had no idea what the actual ideas were or whatever. I was like most people, I watched it for the, gratuitous, sex and violence, and that's, and for the taboo nature of it. But on further analysis, on looking back, there is actually some sort of, substance to it. It sort of struck a chord with people of pessimistic thinking, and in fact you can sort of view it as sort of the trend. I would say The Sopranos sort of encapsulates much of the development in thought of the past 10, 20 years of a common thread, that's a chord that struck in people of pessimism. That's our world. Our world is, psychiatrists and Prozac and dealing with all those sorts of issues, themes of suicide, futility, what's the meaning, what's the purpose, what's the point of life. It name dropped a few thinkers like, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Freud, these sorts of people. And again, dealt with these sort of pessimistic things. So a scene I was actually thinking about that I remember that stuck with me and has informed some of my thinking is when AJ, who's the son of Tony Soprano, goes to the hospital to see his grandmother, Livia Soprano. And, she's a, malignant cunt. And he's like, they're talking about these kids that died in a car crash. And he's like, what's the use? What's the purpose? Those kids were, they were dead meat. And she's like, yeah, the world's a jungle. You die in your own arms. It's all a big nothing. What makes you think you're so special, or something like that. I can actually remember that. I don't know why, but I just remember it. And I remember him going to the psychiatrist, Tony Soprano, and he's like, it's all a series of distractions before you die. What's the point? And, dealing with those sorts of ideas, contemplating those sorts of things, and showing, the fraudulent nature of modern psychology, of trying to basically try and fix problems that are basically moral and spiritual problems, and such. But at the end of the day, it's interesting to analyze it because it may be a gateway to pessimism, but it's a disingenuous gateway. It's a false gateway. It's a false confrontation in dealing with these sort of issues. Most of the thinkers are the modern existentialist sort of group of philosophers, Kierkegaard, Heidegger, Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, that sort of thing, that are, Albert Camus. Like, for instance, Albert Camus compared human existence to the myth of the Sisyphus boulder in Greek mythology as being like, the metaphor of human existence, of being, futile, because in the end you die anyway. Your daily life, you're just pushing the boulder up the hill, you're not really accomplishing anything. And at the end of the day, these thinkers sort of had to cop out. They had to be like, oh, well, Sisyphus must have enjoyed pushing his boulder up the hill, because we're here already, and we have to sort of either become life-affirming or not. Your choices are, commit suicide or become life-affirming. So at the end of the day, it's not really taking the issues seriously. It's sort of attempting to, in a secular way, deal with the problems without really dealing with them. And in fact, Woody Allen, I'm not a big fan of Woody Allen movies or whatever, but Woody Allen even talks about this in a few interviews that he does about given the grim facts of our, life, that can sometimes life can raise all sorts of, questions, like, well, yeah, what's the point, that sort of thing. The role of the artist is to create a meaning where there otherwise might not be a meaning, and to try and answer these sorts of questions, or at least deal with them, and try and make something without giving you a false sense of heaven or whatever. So basically, sublimating these things in a secularized way. So shows like this show that these sort of pessimistic ideas are actually quite widespread. It's a thing that's in the culture that is, actually quite common, and people don't want to acknowledge it or deal with it. So what has to happen, what David Chase has to do in order to deal with these things and flirt with these ideas of pessimism and stuff, is make it set in, like the mafia. So that at the end of the day we can say, okay, well, Tony Soprano is going to be like that, yeah, because he's in the mafia, because he's a duplicitous hypocrite, and that's what you get when you're in the mafia. You're going to be left with meaninglessness and stuff, and oh yeah, you should just go to church or something, and yeah, that's what happens when you're a greedy motherfucker, and all that sort of stuff. It's not really dealing with it honestly, that in fact Livia Soprano, the dark truth is that, she is right. And so it's sort of trying to deal with that issue. So really that this is the attempt of our culture to deal with these sorts of issues. The fact is that to a lot of people, yeah, Livia Soprano is right, and how do you reconcile that? How do you deal with that in a secular culture? And there's not a whole lot of ways these ideas can go. You're either going to be stuck with this sort of pessimism, or you're going to have to go in some other, direction. You're going to have to go to a religion, or you're going to have to go to a psychiatrist or something like that. So at the end of the day, it's sort of, I guess, The Sopranos and Tony Soprano is a modern day, it's like Scarface, a modern day Macbeth. And, again, it's not true pessimism, it's pessimism we can flirt with as long as we can revile it, as long as we can say, put a life-affirming spin on it, or something like that. Anyways, just some reflections on hearing of James Gandolfini's dying. Anyways, Philosopher Stoner 666 out.